Dash. Now, before we get started, I want to give a round of applause to this guy, Anthony, right here. Anthony, tell them about your big story that came out today. I read it. I was waiting to tell you I read it. It was absolute fire. Tell the people what you did, where they can find it, and why it's coming out right now.
Wow, he surprised me there. Yeah, well, wrote a story on Boogie Ellis, obviously a junior guard, USC. This is honestly one of my favorite pieces. He was a really great person to feature. You could definitely check it out on my Twitter. Definitely go to dailytrojan.com/sports. This was part of our UCLA special edition. So we also have another feature on Isaiah White, which was like one of my favorites of all time because he's such a cool character. He has two kids and he's playing on the team. So that was always also great. But yeah, make sure to check out that one. And also, yeah, the Boogie Ellis one, really fun. A great time. So appreciate the shout out.
I had to let the people know it was a tremendous read. I enjoyed it a lot. But as I said, welcome back, everybody, to our first on-camera edition of the show in like months. We were trying to do one of these a few weeks ago, and then we were like, we finally hammered down a time after trying for 3 weeks. And then literally 2 minutes prior to the show, my whole power went out in my entire apartment. So we did a space. We've been doing some spaces, but it's good to be back. Well, we can't see your lovely faces, but you can see ours. Anthony, how are you doing on this wonderful Friday? Is this our first Friday show too? It's a big day for the Trojan Dash community.
This is a very monumental day. Yeah, I think this is for sure. I honestly don't remember the last time we did it on camera one. I'm thinking maybe Lincoln Riley or maybe after the Cal game. So, geez, a lot's gone on since then. But yeah, just excited to be back. Obviously excited for the game tomorrow. Hopefully it's a good one.
Hopefully it is a good one indeed. Now, of course, that's why we're doing this show tonight, this very special historic edition of the show. Like every show we do, I say that it's a historic edition for some reason. But UCLA versus USC happening tomorrow night at home right here. Number 21 versus number 12. A huge game, so many implications at stake in the Pac-12. The Crosstown rivalry, obviously, is high stakes in and of itself. Happening tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Anthony, give me your first takes on how things might go. We'll talk about whether they have a chance a little bit further on in the show. I think you and I disagree with that, and as far as our whole outlook on this team goes. But what are you looking forward to most about the game on Saturday evening?
Sold out environment. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been at Galen Center where it's half empty, just looks dead. Chavez Goodwin had a really good quote today, called the game against Pacific a library. And he said he's gonna take a photo of the sold out arena and frame it. I wouldn't go that far, but that's something I'm looking forward to. Having a good environment, especially when you go against Arizona on the road, you see the environment they create. Having that at Galen against UCLA, that's a key. I think the players feed off of that energy, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Definitely, this is one of the biggest matchups of the season, not because it's also a rivalry game, but because they really need this type of win against a quad one opponent, which we can discuss later on. And just also, is Isaiah Mobley going to play with the mask? He missed the game against Pacific because of I think it was a semi-fractured nose. So how is he going to come out? I think Andy Enfield has said that they expect him to play, but he's also just listed as day-to-day. So looking forward to what he does and possibly his last home game against UCLA as a Trojan. So looking forward to that. And also Boogie, I wrote about in my feature, the people around him have mentioned when the games are big, when the stage is bright, he really shows up and he enjoys it when people doubt him and he proves people wrong. He loves doing that. So I'm going to be interested to see how that is against the UCLA team who's got just amazing guards. And in a crosstown rivalry game, he's from LA, or not from LA, he's from San Diego. He's a local kid. It's a big game for him. And he talked about how excited he is for that atmosphere. And also the players like I mentioned, Chavez Goodwin, Drew Peterson, Isaiah White, who were on that team last year but didn't get to play in front of a crowd in a rivalry game. Lots to talk about, but those are really the main things for me.
Yeah, I'll say one of the things I'm most excited about for this particular game is I don't know if you felt the same way, but it feels like around school, just in the whole week leading up to this game, it feels like there's been a buzz. And it feels like there hasn't been that kind of buzz in a number of years. Obviously, you didn't really have it last year because there were no fans, but it just feels like people are talking about it. Maybe it's because both teams are actually good now. Maybe it's because it'll be maybe an evenly matched game. Maybe it's because people are just excited to be back inside the stadium. But it just feels like there's this air around this game that I haven't really seen around a basketball game or any game for that matter in the last few years. And there's been one game that I've thought about this entire week. It was March 7th, I believe it was, 2020. The last game before COVID shut everything down. The Jonah Matthews step back game winner game. That was probably the most electric atmosphere I've seen in a single game at this school since I came here 4 years ago. And that kind of atmosphere is something that I think you might get in this one too. So it just feels like there was a heightened level of excitement around this one that I think we haven't seen in a few years. And whether it's actually going to be jam packed, I think it very well might be. Like it just seems like people are actually excited about this game for the first time in a long time. Not for the first time in a long time, but more so than they have been in years and months and weeks past. So that's what I'm excited for. They obviously chose a prime time to have this one. So that'll be super exciting too. But then when you get into the matchup too, I'm a little bit less, from a USC perspective, I'm a little bit less excited. We can sort of talk about our predictions and stuff here, how we think that this one's actually going to go. I'll just say it. I've yet to see it from this team. I've yet to see that one game where I've been like, this is a team that can actually make stuff happen against quality teams, especially like ranked number 12. Like on Tuesday night, they beat Pacific by how many points? They beat them by like 6 points. They were down by 11 points at some point in the second half. Like this team, I just haven't quite seen it yet, and maybe they'll prove me wrong. But they haven't proven me wrong thus far. They're 20-4, obviously, and 20-4 is what it is. That's obviously impressive, but I just haven't seen them do it against the type of teams that makes me think that they can do it against a team like the Bruins. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a common argument. Their schedule isn't as difficult as, let's say, for example, UCLA, they played Villanova, they played Gonzaga. I mean, they played Marquette on the road. I mean, those are tough games. USC didn't really have that type of schedule. And those are things that are kind of out of your control. I think what you say is a legitimate point. I mean, they haven't really primarily proved, what they're worth. But I think it's still there because there's been lack of opportunities, and I'll point to that Arizona game where that's a tough environment, a game that they could have, should have, and would have won in any other circumstances. They went 1-14, 1-13, I think, the last 5-6 minutes. I mean, how many times is that going to happen? So I think they still can prove it. Tomorrow is a prime opportunity. Now, if they lose that game, and it's a different discussion. But if they go there and they handle their business, then you can start believing it's a legitimate. This is not a bad UCLA team by any means. Don't look at what happened in the last week. This is a very good team, and I think they're determined. I think Ethan Anderson had a crazy quote. He said, "I don't want to make it be like life and death, but I'm telling them it should be like life and death," which is a little too intense, but. They're taking it seriously. I mean, they really want to get this win. I mean, both sides. Mick Cronin has said it as well. And USC, you're right. They still have to prove it. They haven't really proved it, but you can't really blame some of the non-conference, the weak schedule type thing. They really haven't had opportunities to prove it. The early season schedule, Oklahoma State, that would have been a good game, but obviously that got canceled. Outside of that, I mean, they really haven't they haven't played anyone, to be honest with you, and that.
Yeah, but hold on. That's exactly my point. My point exactly is that they haven't been able to prove it against anyone. Like when you don't have them playing against top 10 teams week in and week out, like you have to judge their future prospects, their overall quality on how they do against the teams that they should be beating up against, and they just haven't been doing that. So like, what else can you go like? I guess my question is, if you're going to say, where does this skepticism come from when it comes against quality opponents? My question is, where does the hope come from? Because all you have to judge from is the teams that have not been that great that they've struggled against. And that's all your sample size. And then you have like Arizona, where they actually hung in there, sure. But then you saw down the stretch the kinds of things that can plague this team. Like they don't have that one guy that can just get them a basket when they absolutely need it. They missed 14 of their final 15 shots. And yeah, it is true that like they just went cold and that happens. But also like there is something to be said about the fact that the one moment when they had a chance to prove that they could hang with these teams, that they had a chance to give the ball to a just flat out playmaker and somebody who could just get them a basket when they absolutely need it. They didn't have anybody to turn to there, and they turned to everybody and nobody could really come through. So when that's all you have, when that's all you've seen, where does your optimism come from? As the resident optimist on this show, where does it come from?
That's just a certain belief. I look at what you're saying is valid. Haven't played top opponents, but that's just something that's out of their control. I mean, they don't make the schedules up. They just play who's in front of them. So I think if that's what they do, that's their strategy. That's basically what they've been doing. You just play who's in front of you, and you can't focus on stuff you can't control about not having quad one opponents, not having quad two wins. When those opportunities come up, of course, you got to maximize those. At Arizona, that was technically really the first quad one team they've played the whole year. You can't expect them to go into that environment and win that game when it's the first time they're playing in that type of environment for the season. This is a different group. They've got to obviously build that chemistry and that, or not chemistry, but build that experience against teams like that in that environment. Obviously, as the season goes on, there's really not much left. I mean, you play after UCLA, you play Washington State, you go to at Oregon State. At Oregon is another opportunity. And then the final 3 games at Oregon, Arizona, UCLA, those are big games for them. If they end that season on a 3-game winning streak and you go into the Pac-12 tournament strong, then you can make a case. I am just looking at this hypothetical situation. The fact that they haven't had those quad one wins, it's a valid thing. But when they don't play quad one teams, I mean, what do you expect? It just doesn't make any sense to say that. The reason why I'm optimistic is because we haven't seen any reason to be pessimistic. Obviously, there's been scoring droughts. There's been poor performances. The 2 losses against Stanford, specifically the second one, was really bad. But it seems like every time something like that happens, they bounce back and they perform. That Pacific game, I have no explanation for that. I have no idea what happened. All I can say is Tuesday night against Pacific. Look, I wouldn't want to play in that game either. So that's my excuse.
Yeah, and not having Isaiah Mobley certainly hurt. And if they don't have him again against UCLA, I don't know really what you have to hang on to there. But I guess, sure, you're right. When you don't have that many games against quad one teams, because it is true, maybe it's just possible that they play down to their opponents. Like I think that certainly might be the case. Maybe that was what happened on what was that, Tuesday night against Pacific. Maybe it's what happened against Oregon and Stanford and things like that. Although Oregon might actually be really good because they also beat UCLA on the road when they were number 5. Number 3. So maybe they're good, but it seems like they just actually play down. So maybe I guess that's where your optimism can come from. I just come back to the fact that some of the trends that we've seen ever since they've come back from the COVID hiatus. Oh, I just said hiatus. That is not a word. They start every game down by 7 to 12 points. Their free throws have gotten slightly better, but largely just because they're taking not as many. Although I will say they hit 18 of 23 on Tuesday night, and 2 of the misses came by Chavez Goodwin, I think, when there were 5 seconds left and the game was pretty much over. So effectively, when it mattered, 18 of 21 is certainly encouraging. I don't know if that's something that you can really count on, but it's certainly promising there. They haven't been shooting the 3 ball well. They haven't been doing it in high volume. They are allowing, it seems like opponents week in and week out are just hitting every single 3. And when that happens, once or twice, it's maybe teams are just hot and you can't really explain that. But when it happens as often as it's been having, Cal, Stanford, Oregon, you sort of have to wonder why they're getting that many open shots and why they're being allowed to hit those. It just seems like on both ends of the floor, they've been a little off, a little out of I don't know exactly what the word might be, but it just seems that they haven't quite had the same flow on either side that they had in 2021. And that's the kind of thing that you do that against Pacific, you can go down 12 points 10 minutes in, and you're by far the better team. I'm not going to argue that they're a less talented team than Pacific. I'm not even going to argue that they're a less talented team than Stanford or Oregon, because I think they're probably more so than those teams. Maybe they're probably more talented from a pure talent perspective than everybody they've played except for Arizona, and maybe soon to be UCLA. But like they're a talented team, so when you go down 10 in the first half, you're fine. You know, you don't need to hit every three or every like you're going to be okay, especially when you have the presence down low that they've had in a lot of those games with Isaiah Mobley, except for Tuesday night. But when you do that kind of thing against UCLA, all of a sudden you're in a much deeper hole. And it's a lot harder to dig yourself out of those 10-point holes against teams that are going to punish you. And if they were to do that against UCLA, like the game's over. I'm sorry, but if they go down 10 points halfway into the first half, like they're probably not going to come back from that game unless they start hitting every single three, which is something that we just have not seen from this team since the first week of the season, and even not very much even then. So I worry that even though it seems like they play to the level of their inferior opponents, if they were to slip up and come out of the gate on the wrong note, or have an off night from free throw, or a normal night from free throw, or they're hitting every shot. Like, it seems like everything has to go right for them to win this game and to win these types of games. They're going to have to win down the stretch in order to become an actual threat in Pac-12, in March Madness, and all those kinds of things. So I don't know. I guess I'm skeptical there. Again, I'm certainly open to changing my mind if they prove me otherwise. I just haven't seen signs yet that it's going to happen. Maybe it happens maybe it happens now. But I don't see it yet. And if the same trends, the same themes that have plagued them against bad teams plague them against good teams, it's a wrap.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, I think, to answer the question of how much of a chance USC has, they have a chance, but they can't get out to a bad start. They just can't. Once you kind of hit it on the nail. I mean, once you get out to tougher opponents, and then you get off to slow starts, you just can't have those. You can't have those scoring droughts, and that's just becoming a staple of Andy Enfield's teams. I mean, we saw it last year. It didn't really hurt them as much, but this year it's kind of hurt them against Stanford both times. Against Cal, they even had some some slip ups on scoring droughts. You can't have that happening against UCLA. And Isaiah Mobley's, if he's out, I mean, I really don't think they have a chance to win it. He's such a big part of that offense, not only just scoring, but just facilitating. I mean, he leads the teams in points, rebounds, assists. You're not going to find anyone else that can really fill it up like that. So he's a big piece, but they still have a chance. I mean, look, UCLA's got outstanding guards. Talk about them all day. Tyler Campbell, Johnny Juzang, whoever you want to talk about. They're just not as big as USC. They weren't as big as them last year. They're still not as big this year. Play Cody Riley and you got Miles Johnson. That's about it. You got Isaiah Mobley and Chavez Goodwin. Assuming Cody Riley is on Goodwin, you can put Jaime Jaquez probably on Isaiah Mobley, ideally, and then whoever Juzang is guarding, if it's Peterson, if Agban Polo's in the lineup, if it's Ethan Anderson, that's whoever offense. I think they can work with that. They can work and put him in pick and roll situations to make it difficult on Juzang, who's been on fire recently. You got to make him work on defense so he can calm down on offense. So there's a way to win the game. It's not going to be easy. Even though UCLA had a really ugly 3 overtime loss to Arizona State, they're still a strong team. I mean, that's like just no joke. But USC's got a chance. I mean, they have to prove it. We haven't seen it. You're right. They haven't played these types of opponents. But me just hearing what's going on with the team, hearing their belief going into it, I think they have a chance legitimately. Obviously, Isaiah Mobley can tilt that, but even without him, they're gonna give a fight. They're not gonna back down. And these starts that we're talking about, they know it. I mean, after every post game press conference, they're talking about, how do we get past these starts? And then they say, we got to do this, we got to do that. And the Enfield is probably tired of it. But you mentioned a good thing about the 3-point shooting. Their discipline on defense has been poor. And Andy Enfield has mentioned that that's another, that's a big key. Staying disciplined on that perimeter defense and also not fouling. because UCLA is one of the best free throw shooting teams in the country.
Yeah, I think, look, if they're going to have a chance to win this game, and especially if they're going to actually win it, it's going to have to be a super low scoring kind of grinded out type of battle, right? Because you're going to have a lineup of like Agbonk Polo, Isaiah White, Kobe Johnson, maybe is somebody else who's shown a lot of promise on the defensive end of the floor. If you don't do that, if you don't have guys in there that can really get you stops and match up against some of the most talented guards in the Pac-12 in the country, there's not much really stopping them from putting 95, 100. You're going to win that kind of game. So if you go with a lineup heavy of guys like that, there's not much offense there. Like, let's be completely honest. Those guys have been inconsistent at best. I know Isaiah White hit a couple threes against Pacific, but by and large, that hasn't been a lineup that'll give you much offense. And then it's like you kind of have to pick your poison, because it's like, yeah, you can play the guys that can get the stops consistently, but they're not going to give you much offense. Or you can go with your offense-heavy lineup, and then you risk, any of those guys really exploding for 25 points and then putting up 100 points on you when you're just not going to win that kind of game. I mean, even on their best nights against Cal State Northridge or whoever, some Eastern Kentucky, whoever any of those early season opponents might have been, like they weren't even getting very close to the 100-point mark. Maybe they got in like the low 90s or something like that once. So if it's just the kind of game where you can't get a stop, they're hitting every shot, like it's, you can maybe hang in there and lose by like 10 or 12 or something like that, but you're not going to actually win that game. So it just seems to me like they're going to have to go with that kind of lineup where you have length, you have guys that can get stops, you have guys that can guard 1 through 5, and they have some of those guys, some of the guys that we just talked about. But they don't have that one, aside from like Isaiah Mobley, probably. They don't have that one guy that can guard 1 through 5 or even 3 through 5 and give you, 15 points on 60% from the field or something like that. That's the kind of thing that you're going to need if they're going to explode on you offensively. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach that chess match and how much they want to trade in some offense for some stops, because that's probably the kind of thing that they're going to have to do. And if they decide to go with the let's engage in this high scoring, like we're going to, each get in the upper 80s, low 90s kind of game, like I don't know if that's the way to go. I think if that's how the game plays out, it's probably not too great.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's going to be, if they win, it's going to be a grind out game. That's the type of stuff Andy Enfield likes. I mean, look, they haven't scored 80 points since Oregon State, January 13th. I mean, and in that time, I mean, it's been 60s. It's been, against Stanford, it was 64 to 61. Against Arizona State, 58 to 53. I mean, these are low numbers, so they like to grind it out. And against UCLA, that's what you have to do. I mean, you're not gonna keep up with them offensively. They're too strong. Their guards are just too explosive. So you have to grind it out. And I'm intrigued by that. What you mentioned with those lineups, I'm very intrigued by what Andy Enfield is going to do. Is he gonna run a 4-forward lineup? I think that was kind of the question going into last year's rivalry game as well. Is he going to go forward heavy? And he basically did. And obviously paid off with 2 wins. But what's going to look like this time? I mean, I think that's basically what he's going to do, especially with 2 guards, Ethan Anderson, Boogie Ellis. I mean, you got to go, heavy on your forwards. That's where USC's money is. I mean, they got to grind it out. No way you can stay in a shootout battle with UCLA, because they're just going to run them out the gym, and you can't get into scoring droughts. I mean, we mentioned it before, but it's just imperative. You just can't get into droughts. No 3 minutes, no 4 minutes without a field goal. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it just happens so many times. I mean, they have to score the ball, and they can't get into droughts. If they get into droughts, at least play good defense. That's all I can ask.
Yeah, they can't really afford to do the type of thing that we've seen from this team where like they start slow, even if it's only like a 3 or 4 minute bad start. And then also like, the last 3 minutes of the first half and the first 5 of the next half, like they can't score and they can't get stops or anything like that. Because those are the kinds of things that, again, you can bounce back from against Pacific, but you can't really do that against UCLA. Should we get into some predictions here? We got about 5 minutes left on the show. Should we try to do our best to see what's going to happen in this one? I'll start. I'm going to go Okay. I'll walk you through chronologically how I think this game's going to go. I think it'll be pretty even in the first half. I think they enter halftime down I don't know, 5 or 6 points or something like that. Probably a low scoring kind of half because they do go with the forward heavy kind of lineup. Maybe the crowd gets into UCLA's collective head and they can't hit shots or get into a rhythm or anything, like that. Halftime, it's, I don't know, 31-37 UCLA. And they sort of hang in there early in the second half, and then UCLA kind of pulls away. I think it's going to be 81-68 UCLA.
Whoa, jeez.
Yeah.
13 points. Wow. So what is that, was it 50-point half? No, not 50 point. Around 40-some point.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's bold. You know what? I'm gonna go on the opposite. I think I'm feeling a little.
He's taking them.
Lucky, man.
He's taking the Trojans.
I think USC is gonna, stay in a nice lead throughout the game. It's gonna get ugly in the middle of the second half, and they're gonna bounce back with a nice finish, and they're just gonna take the win and a grind out. Nice, let's say 71-68. What about that?
71-68. Okay.
68.
Okay. Look, maybe 13 points was a little too pessimistic. I'll go 81-72. That's my final pick. I think they'll keep it close. Look, I think the thing that's going to win out is the thing that often wins out in these type of games, and that's just talent.
Yeah.
You're going to have a loud crowd, a rowdy crowd, a rambunctious crowd. It's probably going to get into their heads a little bit. The size, the whole length thing might cause them some problems. But in the end, I mean, some of those guys are they're one of the more talented teams in the entire country. There's a reason they started ranked number 2. They were number 2 overall, right?
Yeah.
Now they're number 12. This is going to be the kind of game where, again, they hang in there. They use every ounce of the home court advantage that they might have. In the end, UCLA is going to put their foot on the pedal. It isn't going to be a totally it isn't going to be the kind of loss where you're like, oh, this team is total garbage. Even though it sounds like that's what I've said so far in the show, that's not what I actually think. They are for sure probably a top 25 or 30 team in the country, which is fine. And it's the kind of team that can maybe put together a March Madness run. I question whether they have the playmakers and the automatic buckets to get that done. I just don't know if they have the firepower that they did last year in terms of Evan Mobley. I know that their roster is largely the same.
Yep.
I don't know if they quite have that this year, but I think they're a fine team. And I think that's why they're probably going to hang in with them. They have the size, they have the length, they have the defense to get it done. But I don't know if they have the playmakers on the offensive end of the floor.
It's valid what you're saying. I mean, they'll hang around. That's what I think. I definitely don't think it'll be a blowout. Because they'll hang around. I mean, they've got that experience, they've got that depth. That they have to ride their defense. I mean, there's really no other way of saying it. They've got to ride their defense. And their defense has been strong, really for the most part of the season. Obviously, some teams, like you mentioned earlier, get out to hot shooting, and USC hasn't lost 4 straight games against UCLA. And if they win tomorrow, that'll be the longest streak USC has had against UCLA in basketball since I think the 1940s or something like that. So it's bold to say USC will win, but look, I believe it. I mean, they have that depth, they have that experience. Like you mentioned, most of the players were around from last year. Obviously the same for UCLA. But that basically just means that they know what it takes. I mean, these are games where you got to grind it out. I mean, going against your rivals, you got to do anything you can to win. I think Isaiah White actually will have a big role in this game. I think it was against Cal where he really made a huge difference. These are the type of games Isaiah White just flourishes. He just dives on the ground and makes all these hustle plays. I think his length and his defensive intensity will fuel this team. Obviously, he only averages about 11 minutes a game, but wouldn't be surprised if he has a big role. And actually, you mentioned Kobe Johnson. Interested to see if Reese Dixon Waters gets in. He's been shooting well from deep, so you never know. I mean, you mentioned earlier chess match, USC. They have a solid chance in my opinion.
I think one of the biggest points you touched on there was that you never know in a rivalry matchup. Stranger things have happened, that is for sure, but that is all the time we have for this episode. As a reminder, make sure to follow us on all of our various social media platforms. Facebook. No, we don't do Facebook. Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter especially. Check out our website on dashsports.tv. We do columns over with Sports Pack 12 occasionally. Make sure to check those out. Check out Anthony's work in the DT. Did an awesome feature that's out this morning that you should go check out. And make sure to follow along with all of our work at Annenberg and DT. Man, I'm plugging everything right now. Follow us on Twitter and make sure to tune in to another episode coming at you whenever we're coming at you. Well, time will tell. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will talk to you next time.
Peace.